Welcome to HFY Sage of Stars, where humanity's spirit shines brightest among the cosmos. The first thing Nathan Cross noticed after waking was that he couldn't move his left arm. The second thing he noticed was that this wasn't because it was broken, which would have been inconvenient but familiar, but because it was chained to someone else. He cracked open one eye. The ceiling above him glowed faintly blue, pulsing in slow, irritated rhythms like it resented having to exist. Alien alloy detention grade, if he had to guess. He sighed deeply. Well, he murmured, voice dry as ancient parchment, this is new. The person chained to him shifted. Nathan turned his head and found himself staring at a woman who looked almost human, except for the long, elegant ears sweeping back from her head like sharpened crescents. Her dark armor was scuffed and cracked, her posture rigid even while sitting on the cold floor. She was already awake. Worse, she was already watching him with eyes that missed nothing. You are conscious, she said calmly, her voice carrying the weight of command. Temporarily, Nathan replied. That may change once my headache files an official complaint. She blinked once slowly, as if deciding whether this was humor or a neurological malfunction. My name is Commander Kyra of the Verlian Vanguard, she said with precision. You were captured 31 minutes ago. Only 31. Nathan smiled faintly despite the throbbing in his skull. I've had worse first impressions. Kyra glanced down at the heavy restraint linking their wrists, energy crackling along its surface like trapped lightning. You interfered during my extraction. You were bleeding, he said simply. I tend to notice that. You should have retreated. And missed this charming room. He looked around with theatrical interest. Energy dampeners hummed along the walls. Thin lines of red light traced invisible barriers. No windows, no supplies, questionable lighting. 5 stars. Would recommend. Kyra exhaled through her nose, a sound caught between exasperation and something else. Your species uses humor to delay fear. We also use it to annoy commanding officers, Nathan said. Seems versatile. She studied him more closely now. He could feel it, the measuring, the quiet calculation. Her gaze lingered not on his uniform, but on his wrist, where the chain had torn skin raw, blood dried in dark streaks. You did not try to flee when the perimeter collapsed, she said, and there was a question buried in that statement. Yeah, Nathan replied lightly, though his jaw tightened. Turns out I'm terrible at abandoning people. Something unreadable flickered across her expression, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. Footsteps echoed faintly beyond the cell, mechanical and precise, the rhythm of something that had never known uncertainty. Kyra straightened, shoulders squared despite the cramped space. Every inch the warrior. They will interrogate us separately, she said, her voice dropping to tactical assessment. They will attempt to turn us against one another. Nathan leaned his head back against the wall, feeling the cold metal through his hair. Joke's on them. I barely know you. That makes you more dangerous, Kyra replied, her eyes sharp. Ignorance allows loyalty to form without prejudice. He laughed softly, the sound echoing strangely in the confined space. You make friendship sound like a battlefield maneuver. It often is. Silence settled between them, broken only by the low thrum of alien systems pulsing through the walls like a mechanical heartbeat. Nathan flexed his fingers, experimentally. The chain responded with a sharp pulse of energy that made his teeth ache. Okay, he muttered, shaking out his hand. Note to self, don't fight the glowing cuffs. Kyra tilted her head slightly, those elegant ears catching the blue light. You are not afraid. Oh, I am, he said, meeting her gaze directly. I'm just pacing myself. Panic is a limited resource. She almost smiled. Almost. The corner of her mouth twitched in what might have been approval. We will attempt escape, she said with absolute certainty, when the shift cycle changes. And if it doesn't work? Nathan asked because someone had to. Then we die, Kyra said evenly, as if discussing the weather. Nathan glanced at her long ears, her steady eyes, the absolute certainty carved into every line of her face. He swallowed, then shrugged with a casualness he didn't feel. Well, he said, if this is how I go, at least I won't be alone. Kyra looked at him, then really looked at him, and something ancient and solemn seemed to recognize something in return. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Yes, she said quietly, and the word carried more weight than any promise. You won't. Time passed in the cell in a way that felt deliberate, as if the station itself enjoyed stretching minutes into something heavier, more oppressive. The blue glow above them dimmed, then brightened again, cycling through tones Nathan suspected were meant to unsettle prisoners, to break their resolve through monotony and uncertainty. He found it oddly soothing, like being slowly threatened by a decorative lamp. Kyra tested the chain again, more carefully this time. Her fingers traced the alien alloy with professional focus, ignoring the faint burn it left against her skin, the smell of scorched flesh barely noticeable. Energy locked, she murmured, more to herself than him. Adaptive resistance. It learns. Of course it does, Nathan muttered darkly. Even the handcuffs out here are smarter than me. You are not unintelligent, Kyra replied without looking up from her examination. That's kind of you to say, he said. Wrong, but kind. She gave him a sideways glance, and he caught the hint of something softer beneath the tactical assessment. You underestimate yourself often. Only when I'm chained to an alien war hero in a glowing prison cell. Commander, she corrected, but there was no heat in it. Right. Sorry. Alien war commander. A faint, almost imperceptible huff escaped her. If it was laughter, it was extremely disciplined, locked down behind years of military training. The footsteps returned outside the cell, closer this time, then passed with mechanical precision. Kyra's posture shifted subtly, muscles coiling and uncoiling as she tracked the sound with predatory focus. Guard rotation, she said quietly. 6 units. Hybrid synthetic. Poor peripheral awareness. Nathan raised an eyebrow, impressed despite their situation. You got all that from footsteps. They walk like they believe nothing can surprise them. Her voice carried a hunter's satisfaction. Ah. He nodded sagely. Classic villain confidence. She tilted her head, ears shifting slightly. Villain. Never mind. Nathan shifted his position, careful not to jolt the chain and trigger another painful pulse. So, he said, forcing casual into his voice and failing spectacularly, you mentioned interrogation. Yes. Painful likely. Fatal eventually. He winced. I was hoping you wouldn't say that part out loud. Kyra studied him again, those long ears catching every nuance of the flickering blue light. You continue to joke. It's either that or scream, Nathan said honestly. And I don't want to be rude. Her gaze softened just slightly, a crack in the armor. Your fear response is inefficient. Tell that to my heart, he replied. It's been trying to escape my rib cage since we got here. She considered this with the seriousness of a tactical analysis. In my culture, fear is respected. It sharpens the will. On Earth, it mostly sharpens sarcasm. Another silence fell, less heavy this time, almost comfortable. Kyra leaned back against the wall, armor creaking faintly. Nathan noticed how she positioned herself instinctively between him and the cell entrance despite being chained, her body a shield he hadn't asked for but found himself grateful for nonetheless. You could have let me be captured alone, she said quietly, and there was genuine curiosity in her voice. You would have escaped. Probably, Nathan admitted, because lying seemed pointless now. But then I'd have to live with that. You value guilt avoidance over survival. I value sleeping at night, he said. Same thing. Her eyes lingered on him, thoughtful and measuring in a way that made him feel simultaneously exposed and understood. Among my people, that choice has meaning. Nathan smiled faintly. Everything has meaning if you squint hard enough. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the walls. A distant alarm hummed low and brief, then cut out with an abruptness that suggested violence somewhere in the station's depths. Kyra straightened immediately, every muscle suddenly alert. Shift change, she murmured. Soon. Nathan inhaled slowly, steadying himself. Okay. Hypothetically, if we run, how far do we get? To the armory level if we are fortunate. And if we're not? We create a distraction large enough to be remembered. He chuckled despite himself, despite everything. You really know how to sell a plan. Kyra met his eyes, and in that moment, he saw not just the commander but the person beneath, someone who had made this same impossible choice countless times before. Do you trust me, Nathan Cross? The question landed heavier than the chains, heavier than the cell walls, heavier than the entire station pressing down around them. He paused, feeling the weight of it, the enormity of what she was asking and what he was about to answer. Then he nodded once, decisive. Yeah, he said, surprised by how much he meant it. I think I do. Something settled in her expression, something resolved and fierce. Good, Kyra said, leaning closer. Then listen carefully. She lowered her voice as the station lights dimmed again, her breath warm against his ear as she outlined their escape. Nathan felt the chain between them grow warm, responsive, like it sensed intention, like it knew what was coming. Outside, the footsteps changed rhythm, becoming predictable, vulnerable. Inside the cell, two prisoners prepared to become something else entirely. The moment the lights dimmed for the second time, Kyra moved. She didn't rush. That would have been amateur. She waited, counting silently, her fingers resting against the chain, as if it were a living thing she was learning to communicate with. Nathan felt the tension coil through her arm before he saw it in her posture, like a spring winding tighter and tighter. "Okay," he whispered, his mouth dry. "Either this is the escape part, or you're about to dislocate my wrist." "Do not resist," Kyra murmured, her focus absolute. "The restraint will punish sudden defiance." "Great," Nathan said softly. "Even the cuffs have opinions." The hum of the energy field shifted pitch, dipping just enough to be noticeable to someone who knew what to listen for. Kyra pressed two fingers against a narrow seam in the alloy where the glow was weakest, a hairline fracture in the design. Her touch was precise, reverent, like a musician testing a string before a performance. "This model recalibrates every 13 cycles," she said, her voice barely a breath. "During recalibration, it listens more than it watches." Nathan blinked. "You're flirting with the handcuffs." "I am exploiting them." "Right. Of course. Sorry. Carry on." The chain pulsed once, sharp and hot, sending pain lancing up his arm. Nathan clenched his jaw hard enough to taste copper, but didn't pull away. Didn't fight it. Kyra glanced at him, and he saw approval in her eyes. "You endure pain well." "I've had dental work without anesthesia," he replied through gritted teeth. "This is familiar." She made a sound that might have been disbelief or respect. The cell door hissed softly as a guard passed outside, close enough that Nathan could hear the whir of servos, the click of weapon safeties. Kyra froze, becoming utterly still. Nathan held his breath, acutely aware of how close they were now, shoulders brushing, the chain forcing an intimacy neither had chosen, but neither resisted. The footsteps faded into distance. Kyra resumed her work, her voice barely audible above the station's hum. "When it disengages, you will feel weightlessness. Do not panic." "Define panic," Nathan whispered. The chain flashed white, brilliant and blinding. For half a second, Nathan felt nothing at all. No floor, no pull, no gravity, just a strange hollow sensation like the universe had let go of him completely. Then reality slammed back into place with brutal force. The chain fell open with a dull clatter between them, energy dissipating into the air like steam. Nathan stared at his freed wrist, at the raw skin, and the impossible absence of restraint. "Oh," he breathed, wonder cutting through fear. That worked. Kyra was already on her feet, moving with purpose. "Move," she commanded. They moved. The door burst open under Kyra's shoulder, the lock screaming as it failed, metal tearing like paper. Alarms ignited instantly, red light flooding the corridor in waves of angry illumination. Nathan winced at the assault on his senses. "So much for subtle," he muttered. Kyra grabbed his arm and pulled him forward with strength that surprised him. Subtlety was never the objective. Guards turned, weapons rising in perfect synchronization. Kyra struck first, fluid and brutal, a dance of violence years in the making. She disarmed the first guard and used the momentum to drive the second into the wall with bone-crushing force. Nathan ducked instinctively as weapons fire scorched the air above his head, grabbed a fallen pulse baton, and immediately regretted it when the weapon vibrated like an angry insect in his unprepared hand. "How do you turn this off?" he shouted over the chaos. "Do not touch the emitter." Too late. The baton discharged, a wild arc of energy slamming into the ceiling and showering them with sparks and molten debris. Nathan stared at it, shocked at his own survival. "I meant to do that," he said weakly. Kyra actually laughed then. It was short, sharp, and gone as quickly as it came, but it was real, a moment of genuine amusement in the heart of chaos. They ran. Corridors blurred into each other, alien script flashing past in languages that hurt to look at. Bulkheads sealed and reopened as Kyra rerouted systems on the move, her fingers dancing across control panels with practiced expertise. Nathan struggled to keep up, lungs burning, heart pounding so hard it drowned out the alarms, his vision tunneling with exertion. "Left." Kyra barked. Nathan skidded around the corner just as plasma scorched the wall where he'd been standing, superheated metal hissing in his wake. "You could say that earlier," he gasped. "I did," she said, not even breathing hard. "You were screaming." They slid into a maintenance alcove as energy bolts tore through the corridor behind them, the air itself seeming to catch fire. Kyra slammed the panel shut, plunging them into dim amber light. For a moment, there was only their breathing, his ragged and desperate, hers controlled and measured. Nathan bent over, hands on his knees, tasting blood. "Next time," he panted, "I suggest fewer lasers." "There will not be a next time," Kyra said with absolute conviction. He looked up at her, really looked. Her armor was scorched now, hair loosened from its tight binding, long ears marked with ash and blood. She looked fierce, luminous in the low light, like something out of ancient myth. "You really believe that?" he asked. She held his gaze, and something shifted, deep and deliberate and irrevocable. "If we escape this station alive," Kyra said quietly, each word weighted with ceremony, "I will marry you." Nathan laughed. It burst out of him sharp and disbelieving, edged with hysteria. "Wow. Okay, that's new." She did not smile, did not blink. "In my culture," she continued with the solemnity of a vow, "those who face death bound together and choose loyalty over survival form a sacred bond. A battle spouse is the highest union." Nathan's laughter faded, dying in his throat. He searched her face for irony, for desperation, for the madness of impossible situations. He found none of it, only certainty carved in stone. "You're serious," he said, though it wasn't really a question. "Yes." Outside the alcove, alarms wailed louder, more insistent. Boots thundered closer, death approaching with military precision. Nathan swallowed hard, his mouth desert dry. "Kyra," he said carefully, choosing his words like defusing a bomb, "I think we should survive first." She inclined her head, accepting this logic. "Agreed." Then she stepped past him, opened the panel, and charged back into the fire, utterly certain of her promise, utterly unafraid of what it meant. They did not run immediately. Kyra paused just beyond the alcove, listening, calculating angles and probabilities with the speed of a tactical computer. Nathan pressed himself against the wall beside her, pulse still racing, mind still stuck on one particular sentence that refused to leave, echoing in his skull, louder than any alarm. "Marry you." He shook his head once as if that might dislodge it, reset reality to something familiar. "Later," he muttered under his breath. "We're unpacking that later." Kyra glanced at him, one ear rotating slightly. "You speak to yourself often." "It's how I process existential threats," he said. "Aliens, lasers, surprise marriage proposals." She did not respond, but the corner of her mouth twitched with something that might have been amusement. The corridor ahead split into 3 paths, each pulsing with different hues of security light, red for danger, blue for restricted, amber for maintenance. Kyra moved decisively toward the amber glow without hesitation. "Maintenance spine," she said. "Less surveillance." Nathan followed, careful to match her pace, his shorter legs working harder. "I'm trusting you entirely now," he said. "Just so you know." "You already did," she replied, not looking back. "You ran when I ran." "That's uncomfortably accurate." They slipped through a narrow service hatch as the bulkhead behind them sealed shut with a hiss of pressurized air, cutting off the sound of pursuit like a guillotine. Inside, the air was warmer, filled with the smell of ionized metal and recycled oxygen that tasted flat and stale. Gravity shifted subtly enough to make Nathan stumble, his inner ear protesting. "Why does it feel like the floor is judging me?" he asked. "Localized gravimetric fluctuations," Kyra explained without slowing. "The station is damaged." "Good," Nathan said with feeling. "I prefer my enemy's house falling apart." They advanced through the maintenance shaft, crawling at first through spaces that seemed designed for being smaller than humans, then walking as the passage widened. Exposed conduits glowed faintly along the walls, carrying power to parts of the station that no longer deserved it, pulsing like veins in some mechanical beast. A distant explosion shuddered through the metal, the vibration traveling through Nathan's bones. He winced. "Was that us?" "No," Kyra said, and there was satisfaction in her voice. "But it will help." They reached a junction overlooking a massive internal bay. Below them, alien vessels hung in magnetic suspension, sleek and predatory, like sharks waiting to feed. Guards swarmed the platforms, weapons raised, scanning with mechanical precision. Nathan leaned closer to Kyra, their shoulders touching. "Tell me you have a plan." "I have several," she said calmly. "Most are violent." I walked right into that. Kyra studied the bay with the focus of a hunter, then reached for a control node embedded in the railing. Her fingers moved quickly, confidently, entering commands she shouldn't have known. Lights flickered below. Somewhere in the depths of the bay, a ship lurched against its restraints. "What are you doing?" Nathan asked, fascinated and terrified. "Creating urgency." The vessel dropped its magnetic hold and slammed into the platform with devastating force, sending guards scattering like insects. Metal screamed. Alarms escalated into something angrier, more desperate. Kyra turned to Nathan, her eyes bright. "Now." They jumped. For half a second, Nathan regretted every life choice he'd ever made, every decision that had led him to this moment of free falling through an alien hangar bay, while alarms screamed and weapons fire traced deadly patterns through the air. Then Kyra caught a dangling cable mid-fall, swinging them hard into the bay's lower level with the grace of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. They hit the deck in a painful tangle of limbs. Nathan groaned, tasting blood again. "I'm alive." "Yes," Kyra said, already moving, already 3 steps ahead. "Try to remain so." They ran again, weaving through wreckage and stunned guards. Nathan fired the pulse baton with more restraint this time, stunning one guard and narrowly missing his own foot, which he considered progress. "Progress," he said breathlessly, as if saying it aloud made it more real. They burst through an access door and slammed it shut behind them, sealing it just as plasma fire scorched metal, leaving it glowing cherry red. The room they found themselves in was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that preceded either salvation or death. A small craft sat docked at the far end, scarred and battle-worn, but intact. Its hull bore Verlian markings. Nathan stared at it like it was a mirage. "Please tell me that's ours." "It will be," Kyra said with absolute confidence. He laughed weakly, the sound bordering on hysteria. "You have a very optimistic definition of ownership." Kyra approached the craft, placing a hand against its hull with something approaching tenderness. Her eyes briefly closed, and Nathan saw her lips move in what might have been prayer or command. "This ship responds to command imprint," she said, opening her eyes. "It recognizes me." "And me?" Nathan asked, already knowing the answer. She looked at him directly. "It will learn." They boarded quickly, the airlock cycling with efficient precision. Kyra took the controls, her hands moving with practiced ease across surfaces that responded to her touch like extensions of her own body. The engines hummed to life, a deep thrumming that Nathan felt in his chest. He strapped himself in, heart still pounding, adrenaline still singing through his veins. As the bay doors began to open under Kyra's override, external atmosphere venting in controlled bursts, he finally looked at her again, really looked. "So," he said, trying for lightness and failing slightly, his voice cracking. "About what you said back there." Kyra did not look away from the controls, her focus absolute. "I spoke truth." "Right," he said. "Just checking. Because on my planet, people usually date first." She glanced at him then, her eyes steady and unwavering. "On mine, survival together is the first vow." The bay doors opened fully. Space yawned before them, vast and waiting and infinite. Stars scattered across the darkness like scattered diamonds. Kyra pushed the throttle forward. The ship surged ahead, escaping into the dark, leaving fire and chaos in their wake. Behind them, the station burned. The ship did not explode, which Nathan decided was an excellent start to whatever this was becoming. It shuddered as it tore free of the station's gravity field, the hull groaning with stress. Alarms screamed in languages he didn't understand but felt fairly confident were all saying the same thing, something along the lines of, "You're all going to die." Kyra silenced most of them with a sharp sequence of commands, her fingers flying across controls, leaving only a low, irritated hum that Nathan found almost soothing by comparison. They drifted for several seconds in stunned quiet, stars sliding slowly across the forward viewport, like cosmic witnesses. Nathan exhaled shakily, feeling the tension drain from his body in waves. "I don't know if you do this on purpose," he said, his voice rough, "but your escapes are incredibly dramatic." Kyra leaned back slightly in the pilot's seat, shoulders finally lowering from their combat-ready position. "Drama is inefficient." "Respectfully," he said, gesturing vaguely at everything, "I was falling through a hangar full of angry soldiers about 30 seconds ago." She considered this with the seriousness of academic debate. Then inefficiency may be subjective. The ship's lights dimmed to a calmer hue, transitioning from emergency red to soft amber. Nathan unstrapped himself carefully, his legs protesting as he stood, muscles screaming from abuse. "Okay," he said, taking inventory. "We are alive. The station is not. I call that a win." "Yes," Kyra said quietly. "A narrow one." He glanced at her armor, now visibly damaged, scorched plates, cracked seals, and the thin line of blood tracing down her forearm, dark against her pale skin. "You're hurt." "It is minor." "Everything you say that about turns out not to be minor." She did not argue, which concerned him more than if she had. He moved toward the storage compartment, rummaging through supplies until he found a med kit with a blinking green indicator that suggested it was compatible with at least humanoid biology. "Sit," he said, pointing at the secondary seat. "I am capable of—" "Commander," Nathan interrupted gently but firmly. "This is me not abandoning people again." She hesitated, something vulnerable flickering across her features, then complied. Nathan knelt in front of her, carefully cleaning the wound with hands that barely trembled. The ship hummed softly around them, engines stabilizing, systems recalibrating like they were catching their breath too, grateful to be alive. "You did not run," Kyra said quietly, watching him work. "I ran a lot," he replied, focusing on the bandage. "Just not away from you." Her gaze stayed on him, unreadable and intense. Outside the viewport, the stars stretched briefly, then snapped back as the ship entered a low-power drift, conserving energy. Silence settled deeper now, heavier in a different way. Nathan finished bandaging her arm and leaned back on his heels, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment, alone in a ship, far from everything, with a woman who had promised to marry him. "So," he said, forcing a small smile, "about the whole battle spouse thing." Kyra folded her hands in her lap with deliberate care. "You are troubled." "I'm processing," he said honestly. "Back home, someone says something like that, and it's usually followed by awkward laughter and never spoken of again." "In my culture," she replied, meeting his eyes, "words spoken before death are binding." Nathan ran a hand through his hair, feeling grime and sweat. "Well," he said weakly, "good news. We didn't die." "Yes," Kyra said, and there was weight in her voice. "That is why the bond remains." He absorbed this, turning it over in his mind like a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit his understanding of reality. "You realize I might not be qualified for this." "You faced capture rather than abandon me," she said, each word deliberate. "You trusted my command without hesitation. You returned fire despite fear. These are qualifications." "I also screamed when we jumped into the bay." "You screamed while you jumped," she corrected with precision. "That is acceptable." He snorted despite himself, despite everything. High praise. The ship's sensors chimed softly, a gentle sound after so much chaos. Kyra glanced at the display, information scrolling across her eyes. "Rescue signals detected," she said. "Human and Verlian patrols." Nathan's chest tightened, a different kind of pressure. "They're coming." "Yes." He nodded slowly, reality pressing back in. "When they arrive, things get complicated." "They already are," Kyra said, but there was no regret in her voice. Complexity does not negate truth. Nathan met her gaze, searching for doubt, for second thoughts, for the rational retreat from impossible promises made in impossible circumstances. He found none of it. Only certainty. "I meant what I said," she added quietly. He swallowed hard. Outside, distant lights flickered, ships converging, safety approaching like a question with too many answers and not enough time to consider them. Nathan leaned back against the bulkhead, staring at the stars through the viewport, feeling the weight of choice settling over him. "You know," he said softly, almost to himself, "I woke up chained to a stranger today." Kyra inclined her head, listening. "And now," he continued, a faint, crooked smile forming despite everything, "I'm not sure I'm ready to stop being connected." The ship drifted on, waiting while the universe quietly took notes. Rescue arrived without ceremony. 2 patrol vessels emerged from hyperspace like cautious thoughts made real, their hulls marked with the joint insignia of human and Verlian command, a symbol of alliance forged through necessity and maintained through will. Nathan watched them through the viewport, feeling an unexpected reluctance as the tractor beam locked on and gently drew Kyra's ship into formation, pulling them back toward civilization and consequences. "Well," he said, breaking the comfortable silence they'd fallen into. On the bright side, nobody had to come in guns blazing this time. Kyra glanced at the display, reading tactical information, then at him. Disappointing. He smiled despite himself. I knew you'd say that. Docking procedures followed with military efficiency. Airlocks sealed with hissing finality. Boots echoed in corridors. Voices filled the space outside, familiar human accents mixed with the precise cadence of Verlian officers. The door slid open, and suddenly the universe rushed back in, loud and bright and demanding. Medics moved first, their hands gentle but professional. Orders were exchanged in clipped tones. Reports demanded. Nathan answered questions automatically, his training taking over, aware of Kyra beside him, calm and composed as always, every inch the commander they expected to see. When an officer tried to separate them, she placed a hand on Nathan's arm, firm, possessive, unmistakable. We will remain together, she said, and it was not a request. The officer hesitated, clearly calculating whether this was a battle worth fighting, then nodded, deciding this was a problem for someone with more authority and better pay. Hours later, the station wreckage was confirmed destroyed, debris scattered across local space. The mission officially categorized as a disaster narrowly avoided, which Nathan thought was generous, given how much of it had involved them falling through the air while being shot at. He sat on a bench in the recovery bay, a thermal blanket draped over his shoulders despite the warmth, sipping something that claimed to be tea, but tasted like regret mixed with industrial cleaning solution. Kyra stood nearby, speaking with her superiors. Her posture was straight, her long ears lifted in attentive focus, her voice clear and professional. She looked every bit the commander again, the warrior who had stood before councils and led troops into impossible battles. He realized with a quiet start, a tightening in his chest, that he was afraid of losing that closeness, that whatever they'd shared in the dark corridors and stolen ship might dissolve under clean lights and official protocols like a dream evaporating in morning sun. Kyra finished her report and walked over to him, her boots clicking on the deck with familiar precision. "It is done," she said. "Debriefings?" Nathan asked. "Yes." "Consequences documentation." She paused, something softer entering her expression. "And decisions?" He nodded, understanding the weight of what was unspoken. "I figured." They stood there for a moment, the noise of the bay washing around them, medical staff calling out, ships docking, the machinery of military life grinding on. Nathan cleared his throat, suddenly uncertain in a way he hadn't been when facing death. "You know," he said carefully, "back on Earth, people usually need paperwork, witnesses, and a very expensive party to get married." "In my culture," Kyra replied, her eyes holding his, "survival is the witness." He chuckled softly, the sound carrying more emotion than humor. "Figures." She studied him, not as a commander now, but as the woman who had shared chains and fire with him, who had chosen him in the moment when choice mattered most. "You are not bound by my words," she said, and he heard what it cost her to offer him this out. "The bond is offered, not enforced." Nathan took a breath, feeling the air fill his lungs, feeling alive in a way he hadn't before. He thought of the cell, the moment he could have run, the choice he'd made not to. He thought of fear tempered by trust, of humor surviving alongside terror. He thought of who he had been before, someone who kept his distance, who planned everything so he wouldn't have to leap blindly, and who he was now. "I used to think commitment was something that happened slowly," he said quietly. "Careers places people. I planned everything so I wouldn't have to leap blindly. And now?" Kyra asked, her voice equally soft. "And now," he said, meeting her eyes with newfound certainty, "I jumped off a station with you without a second thought." A faint smile touched her lips, genuine and unguarded. "I don't know what this looks like in the light," Nathan continued, the words coming easier now. "But I know I don't want to pretend the dark didn't matter." Kyra inclined her head, solemn and satisfied, recognition passing between them like a completed circuit. "Then the bond stands." Later, as they prepared to part temporarily, officially, Nathan felt the weight of the day settle into something solid and calm, like a foundation being laid. He was no longer just a scout who survived by staying light on his feet, by never committing too deeply to any person or place. He had learned the value of standing still when it mattered, of choosing connection over safety. As Kyra turned to leave, she paused at the doorway, looking back over her shoulder. "I meant what I said," she reminded him quietly, a promise and a challenge. He smiled, steady now, fear replaced by something stronger. "I know." The doors closed between them, not as a barrier, but as a promise deferred, a future waiting to be written. Outside the bay, stars waited, vast, patient, and full of paths neither of them would walk alone. For the first time in a long while, Nathan Cross felt ready for whatever came next. He no longer feared walking beside someone else, no longer needed the safety of distance and careful planning. Sometimes, he had learned, the most important choices were made in fire and darkness, chained to a stranger who became something more. Sometimes survival was just the beginning. This has been HFY Sage of Stars, where humanity's courage shines brightest in the darkest reaches of space. Thank you for listening.